They gave me a seat because a treaty said they had to, and they gave me the worst one in the house. Ossyr Wardhouse sat on the calcined shelf like something the weather had failed to finish. 9 rings of sandstone terrace cut down into the rock, each one wider than the last. The whole thing open to a white sun that never seemed to move much and never seemed to forgive anything. The stone held heat the way a stove holds it, long after you have stopped feeding the fire. Dust came up through the terraces from the pens below and hung in the air at knee height, so that when the cadets walked they looked as though they were wadding. In the mornings the shadows were long and blue, and the stone was cold enough to make your knuckles ache. By the 3rd hour it would cook a body through its boots. I was 31 days off a cattle operation on the high plains, and I had been on 4 ships to get there, and I had not slept properly on any of them. My hands still smelled faintly of the disinfectant we used on hoof abscesses. That is not a smell that leaves. It gets into the beds of your nails and it stays until they grow out, and then it comes back the next time. There were 600 and some cadets at Ossyr that season. There was one of me. Sethrani are not like us, and I do not want to pretend otherwise. They have no bone in the way we mean bone. Their frames are cartilage, banded and layered, dense as green wood and about as willing to break, and they grow it their whole lives. So an old Sethrani is a slow, heavy, thick-limbed thing, and a young one is a whip. Their skin is gray and slightly translucent at the throat and the insides of the joints, and under it you can see the banding, the way you can see the rings in ice. They have no visible ears. They hear through the plates that armor the throat, 4 of them, overlapping from the collar of the chest to the underside of the jaw. And on those plates they keep their arithmetic. Every Sethrani who has removed another from a ladder cuts a notch into the throat plate. Not deep. A hairline, a scratch you would miss at 3 paces. But they stand close to one another when they speak, closer than we do, and they tilt the head up when they listen. And so the plate is always presented, always readable, always being read. A Sethrani greeting is a body of arithmetic offered up to another body of arithmetic. It is not bragging. It is closer to a resume or a spine. Cador Ossyr, prime cadet of the 9th ring, had 27 notches when I met him. He was 22 of their years old. He had a way of holding his chin high and slightly to the left when someone spoke to him, so that the light fell along the plate and you could count, if you were counting. I was not counting, I was looking at his hands. He had beautiful hands, long 4-fingered, the joints clean, the tendons riding under the skin like cable under canvas. And he held them wrong. He held them the way a man holds his hands when he has never once had to hold something that did not want to be held. Nothing in his life had ever thrashed. Nothing had ever gone over backward with him underneath it. You can see that in a body. It is not weakness. It is just information. Human, he said. It came out of the throat plates as much as out of the mouth. A doubled sound, the way a low string will find a second string across the room and set it going. Ru, I said. That is a sound. It's a name. It is a sound, he said again, and turned his chin and went up the terrace. Proctor Threll explained the ladder on the 2nd day, standing on the lip of the 4th ring with the wind pulling grit across the stone, and 600 cadets arranged below in a bowl of faces and shells and feathers and hides. Threll was old and therefore enormous, cartilage laid down over 60-odd years until she was nearly as broad as she was tall, and she moved slowly, and every movement she made was final. She had 3 notches, 3, in 60 years. I did not understand what that meant for a long time, and when I finally understood it, I had to sit down. The ladder is not a metaphor, she said. There are 900 rungs at Ossyr. Every rung is held. If you wish to stand on a rung, the one who is standing there must come off it. There is no other way onto the ladder, and there is no other way up it. The bowl was silent. There is a particular silence that a crowd makes when it already knows a thing and is being told it anyway, in order to be made responsible for knowing it. Removal, said Proctor Threll, is not a word we use to be gentle. We use it because it is exact. Some of you will remove by killing, some by maiming, some by breaking a will so thoroughly that the body walks off the sand on its own and does not come back. All three are removal. The ladder does not distinguish, and neither will your plate. She let that sit. The conquered has fed this house for 400 years, and in 400 years it has never once graded a cadet on intention. It grades on the rung. Hold it or come off it. Then she looked at me. Not long. She was too old and too courteous for that. But she looked, and 600 heads turned to follow the look the way iron filings turn, and I stood in the middle of the fifth ring in a borrowed gray coverall with a cowvet's forearms and my hair cut short because there had been no good reason to keep it long on a ship, and I let them look. The human is seated by treaty, Threll said. The ladder does not read treaties. That was the whole of my orientation. I want to be honest about what I felt, because the thing that gets told about humans out there is that we are all fury and defiance, that we come off the transport with our teeth already showing. That was not it. I stood there in the heat, and the first clear thing I felt was tiredness, and the second clear thing I felt was a kind of professional irritation, the same irritation I felt the first time I watched a man try to load a frightened bull by shouting at it. They had built a whole institution on a bad understanding of how bodies come apart. 600 cadets, 900 rungs, that is not a school, that is a slaughter with a curriculum draped over it. And I had spent 11 years learning, hand over hand, in mud and in barns and in shipping chutes and on frozen ground at 4 in the morning, exactly how much of a body you have to take in order to make it stop. The answer is, much less than anyone believes. The pins were under the fourth ring, cut back into the rock, and I found them on the third night because I could smell them. Every institution has a bottom. At Ossyr the bottom smelled like manure and hot hair, and the particular sweetness of an infection, somewhere it should not be. And I went down the ramp toward it in the dark the way you go toward a sound you recognize in a language you did not know anyone else spoke. They kept Korath down there, six-legged, plate-hooved. Shoulder-high at the withers on the smaller ones, and the big ones were not small. Draft animals and war animals, the same beast for both jobs, which tells you something about the Sethrani that they would not tell you themselves. They hauled the stone up from the quarries and they hauled the dead off the sand, and once a season, at the high matches, one of them was put on the sand with a cadet as a test of nerve. Stall 16 held the oldest one. I put my hand on the rail and looked at him for a long minute in the blue dark. He was standing wrong. That is all. That is the entire thing. Anyone who has spent a life around animals would have seen it from the ramp. The near hind was not taking its share. He had all his weight forward and slightly off, and he had been standing that way long enough that the muscle along the opposite shoulder had built up in a hard, ugly ridge to compensate, and the coat over the hip on the bad side had gone dull and starey. I stood there and my hands started to itch. I had left an entire life behind and traveled 4 ships to reach a stone bowl where children cut arithmetic into their throats, and the first thing I found that I understood was a lame animal. He is aggressive. The Semish came out of the tack room with a lamp. Small, chest-high on me, ink to the second knuckle on all 6 fingers, an apron with 100 pockets, spectacles pushed up. The Sethrani did not do their own paperwork. The Sethrani had never in 400 years done their own paperwork. He's sore, I said. He is aggressive. He has thrown 2 handlers this season. It is in his file. What's the file say about his foot? The Semish stopped. The lamp swung a little. Files do not concern feet. Yeah, I said, that's the trouble with files. His name was Tallier Osman Cave, and he had run the ledger at Ossyr Wardhouse for 19 years. And in 19 years, he had never once been asked a question by a cadet that was not about a cadet. He looked at me the way a man looks at a tool he has found in a drawer where no tool should be. You are the human, he said. Rue. Rue, he repeated, and wrote nothing down, which I would learn was the most remarkable thing he had ever done for anyone. Then he lifted the lamp and looked into the stall at the old Korath with the ridged shoulder and the dull hip, and he looked for what a Sethrani would have called an unseemly length of time, and he said, very quietly, "How long has he been standing like that?" "Ask his file," I said, and I meant it kindly, and he laughed. It sounded like a hinge. My first match came on the 9th day, at the 841st rung, which is where they put the ones they expect to lose. The ladder gave me a boy. He was Corin soft-shelled, which sounds like an insult and is only a fact. The shell hardens at their maturity and his had not, so he was a thing with a chalky pliable carapace, and long fine limbs and huge dark eyes set wide enough apart that he could see behind himself, near enough. His name was Belim. He vomited before we walked out, not from fear of me. He vomited before every match. He had done it 11 times in the 11 matches he had survived, and the other cadets had a name for it and used the name loudly. I know that he vomited because I was standing beside him in the shade of the gate arch, and I held his shoulder while he did it. He was shaking so hard that his shell clicked. "You should not touch me," he said when he could talk. "Why not?" "Because in 9 minutes I must remove you." "All right," I said. "Do you want water first?" He looked at me with those wide-set eyes and did not answer, and I gave him the water anyway. Here is what happened on the sand, and I am going to tell it plainly because the cadets who watched it told it wrong for the rest of the season, and I would rather it sat somewhere true. The sunward ring is 40 paces across, sandstone dust over packed sandstone, and it is walled with the tiers of the 4th terrace so that everyone above you is looking down. There are no weapons at the low rungs. There is a chalk mark and a proctor and a horn. Belim came in fast and high, and he came in honestly, which I respected, because half of what beats you in a ring is a body lying to you about where it means to be. He was quick. He was quicker than me by a comfortable margin. He led with the left forelimb, and he meant to hook my throat and take me down under him and hold me until the shell of my chest gave, because that is what a soft-shelled Corin can do to a mammal, and it is over quickly, and it is not cruel by their lights. The thing is, I have been hooked and taken down under a body that outweighed me by 900 pounds, repeatedly, professionally, for money. You do not fight the takedown. That is the great secret, and it is not a secret. It is just that nobody who hasn't done it believes it. You go with it, and you make yourself long, and you find the joint. Everything alive has a place where it stops. Not where it breaks, where it stops. The two are 10 degrees apart, and if you can feel 10 degrees with your hands, you never have to visit the second one. I have set an 1,100-pound steer on his side in a chute with 2 fingers and a knee, and the whole animal has gone quiet and stayed quiet because I put him where he stopped and then did not go any further. Belim hooked me. I went with it. We went down together into the dust, and I let his own speed roll us, and I came up onto the top of him, and I took the long, fine limb that had hooked me, and I put it where it stopped. He went still. Not limp, still. Aware, breathing, eyes rolling to find me, entirely intact, held at the exact degree past which his elbow analog would have come apart in my hands like wet chalk. The ring was silent. It went on being silent. I could hear the wind moving grit across the top of the wall, and I could hear Belim breathing hard beneath me, and I could hear, very distantly, a Korath calling in the pens. Proctor Threll did not lift the horn. She was waiting. Everyone was waiting. And what they were waiting for was the 10 degrees. I held him there for 4 seconds. Then I said, close to where I thought his hearing was, "You're done. All right, you're done. I'm going to let go of this, and it's going to hurt, but it isn't going to be broken. Don't pull against me." And I let go slowly, the way you come off a joint. And I got off him, and I stood up, and I stepped back. And Belim lay in the dust with his chest going and did not get up, because he could not, because a body that has been put where it stops does not know for some seconds afterward that it is still a body. Threll blew the horn. It should have ended there. I have thought about this a great deal since. If I had walked off then, the ladder would have absorbed it, the way institutions absorb one strange thing. Threll would have logged a removal by will break, a legitimate category. And Bellum would have carried the shame of it, and I would have had my rung, and the arithmetic would have closed over the whole business like water. But there was a thing wrong with his arm. Not from me. From before, an old fracture in the fine limb badly knit, a lump you could feel through the chalky shell like a knot in a rope. It had gone when we rolled. Not badly. A green crack, the kind that fails again along the old line. I could feel it under my hand while I held him, and once you have felt a thing like that you cannot decide to have not felt it. So instead of walking off the sand, I sat down on it, in the middle of the sunward ring, under 600 faces, in the white sun. I had a knife because everyone had a knife. I cut 2 lengths of the leather binding off my own boot tops. I broke the shaft of the proctor's chalk-lined pole across my knee, which I have never been forgiven for, and I split the halves down with the knife until I had 4 flat staves, and I set the limb a small motion, less than a hand's width, a feel and then a give and then a settle, and I strapped it, staves and leather, snug and not tight, and I checked the color of the flesh below the strapping. Bellum watched me do all of it. He never said one word. His huge dark eyes were on my face the entire time, and I could not read anything in them at all, and I have stopped trying to. When I was finished, I stood up and I helped him to his feet, which took a while, and we walked off the sand together, and at the gate, the Sethrani cadets standing there parted for us the way a crowd parts for something it has not got a rule about. Tallier Osman Cave was in the shadow of the gate, with the ledger open on his forearm and his pen up. He did not write anything. I stopped. I was covered in dust to the waist and my hands were shaking a little, the way they do afterward and never during. "Well," I said. Cave looked at the page. He looked at Bellum, upright, breathing, splinted, walking. He looked back at the page. "There is a column for killed," he said. "There is a column for maimed. There is a column for broken off. Which is he?" The tallier was quiet a moment. Then, in a voice I had not heard him use, a voice with something in it that had been sitting in a drawer for 19 years, "He is walking." "Yeah," I said. "There is no column for walking." Cadets Ossyr was on the terrace above the gate. He had watched the whole thing with his chin up and to the left, presenting 27 notches to the sun, and when I came up the ramp he was standing across the middle of it with his weight easy on both feet. "You did not take the rung," he said. "I'm on it." "You are standing on it, you did not take it." He tilted his head. The throat plates caught the light. "A rung is bought. It has a price, and the price is a body. You have put a body back. You have therefore paid nothing, and you are standing on a rung you have not paid for, and that is theft." I was tired. I want to be clear that what came next was not courage. I was 31 days off a cattle operation, and I had not slept on 4 ships, and I had just spent 2 hours in a white sun setting a boy's arm, and I did not have anything left over to make a speech with. "Then take it back," I said. There was a sound from the cadets around us. Sethrani do not gasp. It is more like a shift in the plates, a dry ripple, 6 or 7 throats moving at once. And Cadder, I will give him this, because it is true, and because most of what I have to say about him after this is not kind. Cadder did not hit me. He was 22 of their years old, and he was the best cadet in that house, and he had 27 notches, and I was a soft-boned mammal with dust in my teeth, and he looked at me for a long moment, and I watched him understand that I had just handed him something he did not know how to hold. Because if he took me off the ladder there in the ramp out of order over a debt of arithmetic, he would have removed a treaty seat, and Proctor Threll would have logged it, and the conquered would have had to look at the log. He wanted the rung, he did not want the entry. Cadder stepped aside. That is all. He stepped aside and let me pass, and the plates of his throat were absolutely still, and as I went by him he said, in the doubled voice, so quietly that I think only the 2 of us and maybe Cave below us heard it, You will bleed on my sand, and I will not need a column for it. Sure, I said. I went down to the pens. I went down to the pens because my hands were shaking, and because there is only one thing in the world that has ever settled them, and that thing has 6 legs and a plate hoof and no opinion about treaties. Stall 16, the old Korath. Cave had beaten me there. He was standing on the bottom rail with the lamp held out, looking, and when I came down the ramp he did not turn around and he said, "He is standing on 3. 4, I said. He's standing on 4 and cheating with a 5th. How long? 2 years, maybe 3. He is not aggressive, said the tallier, and it was not a question, and there was something in his voice like a man reading a sentence in his own handwriting that he does not remember writing. No, I said. He's in pain, and he's been in pain since before anybody currently working in this barn arrived, and everybody who came near him got thrown, and everybody who got thrown wrote it down, and the writing down became the animal. Cave was quiet. That happens, I said. That's not a Sethrani thing, we do it too. I got the stall door open. I want you to understand what that means at that hour in that place, with an animal that had thrown 2 handlers and had 1,100 pounds of shoulder on him, and a hind foot that had been rotting quietly for 2 seasons, and a temper that was not a temper. I did not talk to him. Talking is for us. I stood inside the door and I let him have the whole thing, my smell, my size, the sound of my breathing, the fact of me not coming closer, and I waited. And the waiting took 35 minutes, and Cave stood on the rail with the lamp and did not once ask me to hurry. When the old Korath finally turned his head and put his eye on me and let the muscle along his neck go, I moved. Hand on the shoulder. Hand down the leg, no pause, no hitch all the way, because a hesitation is a lie and they hear it. Fingers into the fetlock analog. Lean the shoulder in. Ask. He gave me the foot. 1,100 pounds of animal that had thrown 2 handlers, stood on 3 legs in the blue dark, and gave me his bad foot, and let me hold it against my thigh. It was as bad as I have seen. Abscessed under the plate, the pus tracking up along the coronet, a stink like a burst tooth. He had been walking on a boil for 2 years. Every step of every stone hall, every corpse dragged off the sand on that. Lamp, I said. Cave brought the lamp down into the stall himself, and knelt in the muck of it in his good apron with his ink-stained fingers, and held it. I opened it with the knife. It went a long way. It went further than I liked, and he shuddered once, all through, a wave from the hip to the ear, and did not move his foot. He held it there. He held it there in my hands and let me cut him because I had asked for the foot the right way and he had given it, and now the thing was between us and he was going to see it through. I have known men and women who could not do that. I have known very few animals who could not. When it was drained and packed and wrapped, I let the foot down slow, and I stood up with my knees popping, and the old Korath put his forehead against my chest and stood and breathed. Nobody in that barn moved for a while. Then Cave said, from somewhere near the floor in a voice that had gone strange, 400 years. What? This house has stood 400 years. He was looking at the animal's foot, at the packing, at the wrap. We haul the stone with them. We haul the dead with them. We have never, he stopped. He took his spectacles off and cleaned them on the apron, which did nothing, because the apron was filthy, and I have thought about that small, useless gesture more than almost anything else that happened at Ossyr. We have never once looked at the foot. He put the spectacles back on. Tallier, I said. Yes. Does the ledger have a column for the foot? Osmond Cave sat back on his heels in the muck of stall 16 and laughed until he had to hold the rail, and it went on a long time, and it was not entirely a laugh by the end of it. Word went where words go. By the end of the 9th day cycle, the house had a story about me, and the story was wrong in the specific way that stories about humans are always wrong. The story said I had refused to kill. The story said I had spared the Koran out of some mammalian softness, and that softness is a thing they have a word for, and the word is not a compliment, and it was on the terraces and in the wash house and in the eating hall within 2 days. I did not correct it. You cannot correct a thing like that with your mouth. But it was wrong. I want to put it down as plainly as I can, because it is the whole of what I brought with me from Earth, and it is the only thing I ever had that they did not. I did not spare Bellum. I stopped him. Those are not the same act, and they do not come from the same place. Sparing is a decision made at the end by a person who has already taken a body to the edge and is deciding now, in front of a crowd, whether to push. It is a moral posture. It requires an audience. Stopping is a skill. It happens 10 degrees earlier in the hands before any decision is available, and it happens because you have done it 40,000 times in cold barns where nobody was watching and there was no glory in it, and the animal did not thank you, and the pay was bad. The Sethrani built 900 rungs on the belief that the only reliable way to make a body cease is to end it. They believed that because they had never, in 400 years, needed to make a body cease and keep it. They had no husbandry. They had no dairy. They had no herds they intended to see again in the spring. They hauled with the Korath and they buried what died, and they never once looked at the foot. And so, an entire civilization grew up around a hole where the knowledge should have been, and into that hole they poured arithmetic. Whereas I came from a species that has spent 10,000 years holding down enormous frightened animals that we intended to keep alive, and letting them up again afterward, and having them come back to the barn the following morning. That is all humanity is, out here. That is the whole of the terrible thing they cannot account for. We are the ones who learned how to hold something down without ruining it because we wanted it back. Bellum came to find me on the 11th day. He came to the pens, because by then everyone knew where I was when I was not on the sand, and he stood at the top of the ramp with the splints still on, and his shell clicking faintly, and his enormous eyes doing whatever they do. "It has stopped hurting," he said. "It'll ache when the weather turns, old break." When I was small, he turned the limb, looking at the staves at my boot leather. My clutch brother, he was removing me. Our proctor stopped it because I was too young to be on a rung. "Where's your clutch brother now?" "He is on rung 406. The dust came up through the terraces and hung at knee height. Somewhere above us a horn went, and a crowd made the noise that crowds make. "Rue," said Bellum, "there are 11 of us who cannot buy a rung, not will not, cannot, we have counted." I leaned on the rail of stall 16 and looked at the old Korath, who was standing square on 4 feet for the first time in 2 years, and did not know yet that it was allowed. "11, I said. "12, said Bellum, with you.